Ja, wordt vanzelf stil. Good evening, everybody. Good to see so many of you here. I want to have a quick look around, but it seems like a lot of people have come. Thank you so much. That's always good to see. Welcome at already the 7th October lecture organized by Raam op Rusland. And already the second year of war in Ukraine, so it's already the second time, and I'm very happy Raam op Rusland managed to arrange Daria Kaleniuk to come to give us a lecture, because it's very important to keep on hearing about what's going on there, what needs to be done. So we will listen to you in a little bit. My name is Kisha Hekster. I work for NOS, Dutch Public Broadcaster. I'm based in Brussels as the EU correspondent, also reporting on Ukraine from time to time. After the lecture of Daria, which will be, she says, about up to half an hour, she just explained me beforehand that the best thing, the most interesting thing for her to do is to hear from you about all the questions you have, and she's happy to answer. So after the lecture, there will be a short Q&A with me to get a little bit more in depth maybe on all the issues you want to touch upon, and then there will be plenty of time for all of you. The evening will end at about 9:30. So I think, yeah, there's not much left to say than a warm welcome to Daria Kaleniuk, who's just come back from Washington. Thank you. Good luck.
There is a water. Good evening. I'm impressed. First of all, with the amount of people who came on Monday evening at 8 p.m. to listen to a boring lecture. And I'm impressed that I'm actually in a church giving this lecture. So thank you very much for your time, for coming here, for your interest. I will try not to be super long and super boring, and I really want us to have a conversation, to have more in-depth dive. I'm coming now from Washington, where we had a delegation of Ukrainian veterans and soldiers trying to speak to American decision makers and American think tankers about the need to support Ukraine and the need for the continued support of Ukraine, uninterrupted support to Ukraine. And you know, one fact really made a lot of interest in America. So I want to ask this fact to the audience. So could you please raise hands those who drink Pepsi Cola? Just one person, two person, three person. It's not advertisement. It's just an interest. Have you ever bought a Pepsi Cola made in Iran? Wow, two people. Where have you bought it? In Tehran. Do you know whether there is a place in Europe to buy Iranian Pepsi Cola? There is a place in Europe to buy Pepsi Cola from Iran. Except of Moscow, which I don't think is Europe. Hungary, probably, never noticed that. But you can buy Iranian Pepsi Cola at the occupied territories of Ukraine. And this is the story which my friend Andriana Rekta, the senior weapons sergeant, told when we were in Washington. She was liberating Kherson in December last year. And right after the liberation of Kherson, they entered the village. And in the village, they were able to buy Iranian products and Iranian Pepsi Cola. So these were the humanitarian products provided by Iran to the occupied territories of Ukraine, which were then resold in the villages. But this simple fact of Iranian Pepsi Cola in the occupied territories of Ukraine is showing how connected is Iran and Russia. These are two terrorist countries which are sponsoring terrorist organizations like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like Wagner Group. And they have a joint goal. And this goal is to undermine international liberal order and the free world. When we look into the Russian narratives and Russian telegram channels, Russian propaganda, they are not fighting Ukrainians in Ukraine. In Ukraine, they are fighting NATO. In Ukraine, they are fighting the United States. And if they would have fighting just Ukraine, it would be hard for them to explain to the people of Russian Federation why they are still stuck and why they lost 50% of their occupied territories. But it's also they are not shy. What are their intentions? And these intentions of Iran and Russia are very similar. And what we are witnessing now in Gaza is very much related to what is also happening in Ukraine. So, you know, the reason why Russia attacked Ukraine is laid down in two messages, one speech and another big article of Vladimir Putin. The speech on February 21st was given by Putin right before the invasion. And in that speech, he mentioned every single anti-corruption reform which we've built in Ukraine since 2014. He mentioned National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, he mentioned Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office of Ukraine, he mentioned Asset Disclosure System of Public Officials, he mentioned that judges in Ukraine are now being selected through the rebooted system of self-governance bodies, judicial self-governance bodies. He mentioned the High Council of Justice. These are complicated names. Not all Ukrainian citizens know by heart the names of these institutions. But Putin mentioned this every single institution, and he said, well, you know, this is how Ukraine is losing its sovereignty. These are all these American NGOs who are spreading American influence in Ukraine, pretending they are fighting corruption. And he probably meant our NGO, but I take it as a credit that it's actually, it means that we were doing our work on building rule of law and fighting corruption in Ukraine in a right direction, and it was noticed in Kremlin. But it also meant that Kremlin failed to destroy Ukraine from inside. Kremlin failed to use strategic corruption to take over political narratives in Ukraine, to embed its political parties and various political puppets, as he has done successfully in Belarus. So, therefore, he had to take Ukraine by force. Therefore, there was this large-scale invasion. But he could not envision that he will be fighting not just the Ukrainian armed forces and Ukrainian institutions. He didn't envision that he will be fighting every Ukrainian citizen who will stand up and find the way how to help the army, how to help the territorial defense, and how to fight with whatever means we had. And to be honest, our allies in the US and also in many countries in Europe didn't expect that as well, that Ukrainians will fight and that Ukrainians have a chance to win. So we founded right after the invasion International Center for Ukrainian Victory, and we told the world on February 25th, actually Ukraine is winning. And at that point, everybody thought that we are crazy people. There is another speech of Putin. It was not oral, it was written, but some people are forgetting this speech, which it was written in summer 2021. It was a long, very complex history essay where Putin rewritten history. And he tried to tell the story that Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist. It's not a real country. Ukrainian people are not real people. These are just kind of Russians. And it was Vladimir Lenin who invented Ukraine. And before that, it was always Russia. And that was an important narrative for Kremlin. And I believe that the occupation of Ukraine will be successful when we will also deoccupy history of Ukraine, which is also colonized by Russia. And with Hubert, we were talking yesterday, and thank you for invitation, by the way, to do this lecture. We were talking yesterday about the Dutch history. And apparently the Dutch people are more related and more close to British people, right? And historically there are ties. But you know, Ukrainian people are more related to Dutch people than to Russian people, if you look into the history. If you look 1,000 years ago, there was Kyiv Rus, the largest country in Europe, with King Yaroslav the Wise, who was spreading his influence through his daughters all across Europe. Yeah, so his daughters later became the Queen of France, the Queen of Sweden, Hungary, and Great Britain. And his wife was Princess Ingigerd, who was buried in San Sofia, and Russians are still fighting for her, for Ingigerd. They are trying to prove that no, she was not buried in Ukraine. She was in Kyiv. She was buried somewhere in Novgorod. So, for Kremlin and for Russian imperialistic goal, it is important to stick to their own way how history looks. And but for us, this war created also a reason to remind to the world and to remind to the Europe that actually Ukrainians are Europeans, and we have the long, hundreds of years history of democracy, of freedom, and of the cultural ties with mainland Europe. So, what did the war change in Ukraine, in Ukrainian society? And we have the title, How Civil Society is Reforming Ukraine. After the large-scale invasion, every Ukrainian became a member of civil society. So if before the invasion there wasn't a perception there are just a few civil society organizations in Kyiv and probably in some regions who are doing activism, who are promoting reforms, who are fighting corruption, who are protecting environmental rights, etc. But after the large-scale invasion, every Ukrainian became the active member of civil society. Every Ukrainian is somehow donating to the army, either through charity organizations or through buying some stuff for their family members who are fighting in the war. Every Ukrainian is somehow helping people who are internally replaced to find the job, to find the place to live. Every Ukrainian is now finding the place where the state is not coping to deal with the challenges and is trying to horizontally, not on the vertical, but on a very grassroots level, to deliver specific services, specific goods, and to contribute to the victory. And there is very low tolerance to corruption in Ukraine. If we look to the most recent pollings, 34% of Ukrainians believe that corruption in governmental institutions is a national security threat, while 24% believe that the threat of nuking Ukraine by Russians is a national security threat. So 24% the threat of Russia using nuclear weapons against Ukraine, and 34% threat of corruption in governmental institutions. There are another important numbers. The support in Ukraine for the EU and NATO integration is as high as never before. So 77% of Ukrainians, according to the poll made about half a year ago, want Ukraine to be EU member. But not for granted. 73% of Ukrainians believe that on the way to EU, There have to be conditions, and we have to implement these conditions. We have to do the reforms. We believe that we have to do our homework on the way to the EU. And 60% of Ukrainians believe that fight with corruption, building rule of law institutions must be done on the way towards the EU integration. So it's a huge appetite in society for change and for reforms, and government cannot ignore that. And the reason why. In Ukraine, there is a lot of sacrifice. Every family has somebody who is fighting, either a family member or a friend who was killed in action, who was wounded. And we understand that we are doing this sacrifice so that the next generation of Ukrainians, which are in the age of 11, like my son, or in age of 5, 7, that they will not have to fight this war. Because when it all started in 2014, those guys and girls who are now in the army, they were 10 years old, like my son. So we understand that if we are not stopping and we are not winning now, the next generation will have this burden, and there will be more cruelties, and there will be more deaths, and there will be more suffering, and it will go viral. It will not just stick to Ukraine. So for us, there has to be future. And our future, we are inspired by the EU, we are inspired by NATO. This is our future. So it is so important that now the doors are opening for us, but not formally, but actually on practice, and that we are on the EU accession track. And this EU accession track is doing miracles to Ukrainian society. It is helping those Ukrainians who are pro-reform oriented to push our government, which is not in whole willing to do the reforms, to do complex, unpopular reforms. But now, we are going even further. In June 2022, there was the historical decision of the European Commission to grant Ukraine the EU candidacy status, but there were 7 conditionalities laid down, which Ukraine had to do afterwards, before the actual negotiations started. Out of these 7 conditionalities, 5 were related to rule of law and anti-corruption. So, a week ago, we've completed all of them, but even more. While there was the requirement from the EU and other partners like IMF to reinstate asset disclosure system for public officials, there was no requirement to make asset declarations public. Parliament voted for the law and said, okay, we will make our assets public, but just in a year. And Ukrainian society was furious. Immediately, Alexander Ryabchenko, the hero, one of the heroes of Ukraine, who is from civil society, but who is now fighting in the very prominent Da Vinci battalion on the east, who was wounded 3 times, he submitted a petition to the president, demanded him to veto this law and force members of parliament to open access to public declarations, to asset declarations. In less than 24 hours, we've got 84,000 signatures, with a minimum 25,000 needed to be collected in a month. So President immediately had to react, and the law was vetoed, and Parliament reinstated their obligation to publish asset declarations. So it probably doesn't contribute a lot to the corruption perception index internationally, and usually people are measuring corruption in countries just referring to this index. Because, you know, having tools to expose corruption just increase information about corruption. But it doesn't mean that there is more corruption. So for us, having right and ability and tools to identify a problem, expose it, and freely talk about that, and then force our government to react, is the way how we fight corruption. It is the way how our society works even during the martial law, even under the existential genocidal war. And government must react. One of such cases was the case of the procurement of food for the inflated prices for the army. We've identified this information. We wanted to resolve this non-publicly, understanding that it could cause some image losses on the international arena for Ukraine. We passed this information to the minister, at that time Minister of Defense. We passed that message to the senior leadership of the country, to President, but there was no reaction. Therefore, we had to go public, and investigative journalists published this report. Society was overwhelmed. People in the armed forces were so angry that it is happening, but they were so thankful for us that we are exposing that. As a result, immediately some people were fired, some deputy ministers were fired, and the process of reforming the non-lethal procurement of weapons started. A few more exposures convinced the president finally to change the Minister of Defense. And the former minister was fired, the new minister is there, who brought a new team, and they are now cleaning up very unreformed sector. And security and defense sector is one, unfortunately, of non-reformed sectors due to the fact that it was not linked to EU conditionalities, it was not linked to NATO conditionalities, it was not linked to IMF conditionalities, and it is a very complex, very closed sector. So, we are hearing, just I'm coming from Washington when a week spent in Capitol Hill, and we are hearing some strange questions to Ukraine. Guys, why you are not holding elections? You will become a dictatorship. How can we explain our citizens that you are a democracy? And really, such a weird request to Ukraine and question to Ukraine. Can you imagine how to hold elections at the occupied territories, or how to ensure voters, 7-8 million people who left Ukraine to vote abroad? How can we ensure that the right of the most active society, 1 million of people who are now mobilized, or in the other law enforcement agencies doing some military operations, how they can vote? How people in the frontline territories will be voting? Isn't it the invitation for Russia on the elections day to have the destruction day of all the civilian infrastructure? So we really hope that the West will not force us to do what is not meant to be done during the wartime. And elections, we had a say in Ukrainian society. More than 100 civil society organizations signed the open statement against any elections during the martial law. There are other ways and means how we can ensure that democracy is prevailing in Ukraine. And these means and tools are actually various opening up various anti-corruption institutions and opening up information about how the money is being spent in the government. And we are doing that. Yet, I'm not saying that there are no problems in Ukraine. I'm not saying that there is no corruption in Ukraine. I'm saying that there is corruption, we admit it, and we are fighting it. And please help us to explain to the Western world that exposing corruption, scandals about corruption, is actually good. You don't hear a lot about corruption in Belarus. How the West could help us to win. And the most recent pollings are saying that absolute majority of Ukrainians believe that we will win this war. And by victory, we mean, let it be clear, to lay it down, liberation of all of our territories, return of all of our people, making Russia pay reparations for all the damage, making Russia accountable and Russian war criminals accountable. But it also means for us preventing Russia from ability to attack again. Therefore, for us, EU and NATO membership are so crucial, important movements. These are part of our victory strategy. So, a year ago, when we were saying, please help us win, the question to us was, but what is victory to you? It's up to Ukrainians to decide what is victory for us. Now, Ukrainians, according to social polling, are very clear what is victory to us. And everything what I mentioned is part of the victory recipe. But the strategy of the West, of collective allies, is not the same. We are hearing a lot of this formula, as long as it takes, that President Biden was saying for quite a while, that we are with Ukraine as long as it takes. And whenever I would hear this message, I would want to ask, as long as it takes what? As long as it takes all our soldiers to die, or as long as it takes all our critical infrastructure to be destroyed, or as long as it takes all your stockpiles to be empty from weapons, as long as it takes what? And our goal and our desire would be that our allies would commit to help Ukraine win as fast as possible. Because time is playing against us. Time is on the side of Russia, time is on the side of Iran, time is on the side of North Korea, time is on the side of China. And these two players, global players, they are working together. So, to achieve this clear goal, we need money. And we understand that citizens of Netherlands, citizens of America, citizens of other countries on the West are quite exhausted to pay their taxes in order to fund Ukrainian defense. We understand that, and we don't want you to pay for what we have to do, but we want Russia pay. And we are not satisfied with the fact that 350 billion of Russian assets are being seized for more than a year, already across Europe and in the US, and this money belongs to the Russian state, which is committing genocidal war in Ukraine, whose leader is being wanted by the ICC for kidnapping thousands of Ukrainian children. We can't understand why there is still not yet a solution, a decision about confiscation of this money and giving them to Ukraine, to ramp up production, to build more weapons in Ukraine, in Europe, in US, and use these weapons in order to liberate our territories. As a lawyer, I'm not buying an argument that there is it's super complicated, it's legally complicated. No, it's a political decision which must have been done yesterday. And if there is a commitment from EU, from NATO, from our allies to help Ukraine win, Russia must pay for that. And Russian assets across Europe must be confiscated as soon as possible and given to Ukraine, not for the refugees of Ukraine in Belgium or in the Netherlands, but used to arm Ukraine, to build more weapons, to arm our armed forces. We've heard yesterday that there are some progressive thoughts about taxing income from Russian assets in Europe and then using this money to help Ukraine. Well, yeah, it's a positive step, but yet taxing incomes, it's kind of a couple of billions of dollars. To win Russia, we need hundreds of billions of dollars. 350 billion would be enough for our economy and for weapons needed. But we are not taking the idea that we will tax the income from Russian money and we will spend it on helping Ukraine as we want, by, let's say, paying refugees Ukrainian refugees in Belgium for doing nothing. We want all this money to be transferred to Ukraine to serve Ukrainian economy, to save Ukrainian people in Ukraine, and to serve those who are sacrificing their life the most. And these are our sisters and brothers in arms, many of whom were not soldiers before February 24, but who mobilized, who are risking their lives, many wounded, many are killed. we need to preserve their lives. Because if we will be out of soldiers in Ukraine, who will protect Europe? Who will protect freedom? I want to say 2 more words, and it's over 30 minutes, I think it will be good to have discussion. The first is on justice and accountability. In Netherlands, there was already feel of what Russia is when MH17 was shut down. It was back in 2014. But not that many countries were willing to accept that actually Russia was the one who was behind that. There were some narratives backed up by Russia that these are separatists, Ukrainian separatists, which attacked this jet, and that there was no Russia, no Russian weapons. It took how many? 7 years or more to confirm that it was Russia. But Russia is still unpunished. How many lives of the Dutch people were lost then? And the evil is still unpunished. We believe in Ukraine that unpunished evil returns. So justice and accountability for every single war criminal, starting from Putin, must happen to prevent the spiral effect of this evil. And the last words about the future of Russia. You know, in early this month, we had a lovely discussion with Russians in Warsaw about the future of Russia. And Russians abroad, who call themselves as Russian liberals, they are saying that, no, there is another Russia. Don't equate Putin and Russia. There is a future of Russia. There are many people who are in jail, who want another Russia, but I don't believe that. I don't believe that there is a future of Russia unless Russia will be completely defeated in Ukraine. And as we are in church now, and I'm Christian, I want to say that I learned how to love my enemy. And with love to my enemy, Russia, I want them to lose. It's the only chance for them to have a future. Thank you.
You want to sit down? Yeah, thank you so much for your very inspiring and motivated lecture. I realized when I sat down that I completely forgot to introduce you except from your name, but I'm quite sure that everybody now realized what your line of action is. You're the co-founder and director of the Anti-Corruption Action Center in Kyiv. And thank you again. Yeah, there were so many things that crossed my mind when you started talking. Maybe first of all about your visit to Washington, because you raised a lot of questions about strange questions you got from there, like yeah, organizing an election. You were saying that you keep on hearing as long as it takes for Ukraine, whatever it takes. I was wondering from your visit, in what way did you return from this visit? I mean, after 1.5 years, what is the state of mind in Washington?
The state of mind shifted from Ukraine to Gaza. The state of mind shifted from fighting Russia and helping Ukraine fighting Russia to winning presidential elections. Ukraine is now being a subject, not a subject. Ukraine is now being as an object in political football. And unfortunately, the aid to Ukraine, the important supplemental, which ensures the continuity of military and budget support, is being stopped. There are no votes for the supplemental because of the very political reasons. Internal reasons in the United States. And we were there, we tried to explain to politicians that you know, when you're talking that hundreds of billions of dollars are being poured to Ukraine, it is not true. 100 billion, which was spent in the US on Ukraine, was not spent on Ukraine. A lot of this money went to ramp up production of weapons in Europe. A lot of this money went for Eastern European countries to buy weapons for the cheap loans from the US. A lot of this money were actually replenishment of their own stockpiles in the United States. A lot of this money went on the humanitarian assistance in Africa because African countries didn't receive food from Ukraine because Russia blocked Black Sea and destroyed our ports. So, politicians were saying, "Well, we know that, but you know, it's politics, and our voters they think about the border with Mexico. Mm-hmm. They think about, okay, why we need to send more dollars of American taxpayers' money to Ukraine." And pay salaries for teachers and doctors in Ukraine if we are not paying enough to our teachers and doctors. And we were saying, okay, but you know, we would want to earn money ourselves. We want to unleash our economy to be able to trade with our goods and products which we produce. Because of blockage of the Black Sea ports, we are not receiving $40 billion in less than a year of money which we can earn ourselves. Therefore, we need aid, budget aid, money, and also military aid. But the strategy about military aid has to be very clear, not as long as it takes strategy Ukraine not to fall. Mm-hmm. Or it has to be very clearly elaborated strategy to help Ukraine win fast.
Win as fast as possible. This is what I noticed as well. So when you answer the American politicians and maybe also the Dutch politicians, how do they react to this answer?
I feel that, the reason I'm here is one of the reasons, is to encourage Dutch politicians and politicians in Europe to take more leadership into identifying what is the clear goal of collective Europe in this war. Because again, Kremlin and Russia is not fighting Ukraine. Ukraine is just a battlefield. Kremlin and Russia are fighting collective West. They are fighting freedom. They are fighting the way how the free world has been organized. And it's not Ukrainian war. It's the Russia's war against the free world, including against Europe, including against Netherlands.
But this is what politicians keep on saying time over and over again.
So but what's the plan? We need to plan to win.
Exactly. From your experience, is there such a plan?
I think that Europe is hiding behind the US and expecting the US to make such a plan, but US doesn't have such a plan.
So?
This plan must be born here.
Tonight.
Whatever.
No, but seriously, you say there is no such a plan in the States. That sounds scary, I guess. Yeah? How does it make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel that I have to be prepared for the mobilization. Because when those soldiers who are now in the army will be wounded and killed, who will be fighting?
Is this something that's already being debated in Ukraine?
Well, I have 5 team members who mobilized from the Anti-Corruption Action Center. Mm-hmm. I have in every civil society organization in Ukraine which was fighting for rule of law, for anti-corruption, for democracy, for European integration, have people who are serving in the army. And many have people who were killed and wounded in the army. It's just the logics, it's the mathematics. There are more Russians than Ukrainians. Russians have more missiles than Ukrainians. Russians have more bigger economy than Ukrainians have. And Russians are free to fire their missiles against our critical infrastructure to deprive us from the ability to have at least some safe place to be able to return our refugees. But we are not able, our hands are tied by the West. We are not able to fight back. We are not able to fire Western weapons against military targets, even in Crimea. Mm-hmm. It was a big risk, it was a big escalation. What if Ukrainians will use American or British or whatever weapons in order to fire military targets in Crimea. But how can we not fire against military targets in Crimea if Crimea is a huge military base from which every day from their air bases the jets are going up into 10 kilometers high and firing half a ton explosives, which are called glide bombs, against Ukrainian civilians, against Ukrainian troops, and we can't stop that other than firing at their military bases. Mm-hmm. So when we are told, okay, do the land operation, your counteroffensive is too slow. Why you're attacking in three simultaneous directions? Well, we are saying, listen, we were successful with the Kharkiv counteroffensive. We were successful with Kherson counteroffensive. But then we had to spend many time, a couple of months, to wait for armored vehicles, to wait for tanks, to wait for enough munitions in order to prepare our forces to be ready for the counteroffensive. But Russians were not waiting. Russians were digging.
So when you're mentioning all these things, it sounds, of course, you are very positive. Your lecture is very encouraging and motivation. But the things you're saying are quite negative. From the perspective of the politicians. I'm just curious to hear when you talk to them and you explain your view that you need more money, you need more weapons, you are preparing yourselves maybe for mobilization. What do you behind the scenes? What is the impression you get when there is no plan? What is their next step?
There is a plan of Ukrainian military, and we know how to win.
But if you don't get the weapons, if you don't get
militarily,
the money,
it is possible. And we've proven that it is possible. And it will not lead to the World War III nuclear war.
That's a relief, yeah?
No, it will not lead to the collapse of Russia. Russia showed us how it can perform the act of goodwill. When they left Snake Island because of our counteroffensive, when they left Kharkiv because of our counteroffensive, Kherson because of our counteroffensive, and left all the armored vehicles, they are saying to their people that they performed the act of goodwill. We want to encourage them to perform more acts of goodwill. But the only way to do that, obviously, is with weapons. But when we are talking to NATO generals, we are asking them, would you do the land operation without having air support? No. Why would you expect Ukraine to have the land operation successful without air support? How to do land operation when there is kind of mine every meter? We have to demine it first. But when we are demining it with the demining machines, Russians immediately, using their drones, which they built a lot of them, they identify these armored vehicles and they target them quite successfully because they have advantage in artillery shells. We are not able to attack their artillery through the air. We are not able to attack their artillery and other munitions in a proper range. We are not able to destroy their logistical chains, to stop, let's say, support which their military is receiving through the Kerch Bridge. Kerch Bridge must be destroyed, but we are not being allowed to receive proper version of ATACMS, which has this capability of destruction. And there is Olaf Scholz, which is hesitating again. First he was hesitating about helmets and vests, then he was hesitating about artillery shells of 155 caliber, then he was hesitating about armored vehicles, then he was hesitating about Leo 2 tanks, it was too escalatory. Now he is hesitating about Taurus. Why to hesitate?
Yeah, when I listen to you, I think, in what way do you still feel supported by the West?
Well, I see so many people coming here on the Monday at
these
8
people
p.m.
don't deliver the weapons to you. They
Well,
don't. Maybe they want to, some of them, but yeah.
You know, in Ukraine we learned that every person matters. Every person can do a lot. if there is clear understanding of the need. So I believe that probably in this audience there are some people who are buying drones for Ukrainian army, or some tactical kits. Probably there are people who can call their politicians and ask, okay, are we inviting Ukraine to NATO and the summit in Washington? And again, invitation to NATO doesn't mean that tomorrow Netherlands will be fighting war immediately. Invitation to NATO doesn't mean that tomorrow Ukraine will be a member of NATO. Invitation to NATO means that there will be channels of cooperation more open between Ukrainian military and NATO military in terms of training, in terms of various interoperability procedures, mechanisms. And it is a powerful message to Kremlin. You know what? Mr. Putin, you can say whatever you want, but you are not deciding. You don't have veto right on NATO. We are deciding. Ukraine will win, and afterwards, Ukraine will be a member of NATO. Therefore, we need this invitation. So that sort of questions, I think, should be asked by the citizens to their politicians.
You also mentioned that you already noticed that the war in Ukraine is, that the war in Gaza and between Israel and Hamas is distracting already from the war in Ukraine. In what way do you already notice this, and how?
Just take newspapers and don't see Ukraine there. Watch TV and
But in what way is it
Ukraine
being
there.
discussed in Ukraine for the consequences?
Well, we understand, and we were prepared for that, that at a specific moment the attention will be distracted. It's hard to say that we are competing for attention between different wars. But you don't want to compete for that attention. We want people to understand that what is happening in Gaza is another front line of the same war which is happening in Ukraine. Because Hamas was training in Russia and just recently went for some reason to Moscow for some sort of negotiations. Why would they do so? Because Iran is providing to Russia drones. Shahed drones are posing a lot of destruction in Ukraine. They gave this technology to Russia, and Russia is building 1,000 drones per month. Iranians are present in Crimea. Not only they are bringing Pepsi Cola there, they are bringing some tools to kill more Ukrainians, and to train, and to learn, and to get some experience and tools and know-how from Russia and from Russian fighters. So this evil is uniting. North Korea is providing more shells to Russia than collective West to Ukraine. So China is the key beneficiary at the end of all of that. So what's the plan of collective free world? We need that plan. We in Ukraine, we are fighting in the battlefields. We are not asking for troops on the ground, for boots on the ground. And we will not stop fighting if aid will be cut. We will fight with sticks. But what will happen afterwards, after we will be killed? I think these questions should be answered. Is Europe ready for Russia place nuclear weapons, as they are doing now in Belarus on the border with Poland, also in Ukraine? Is Europe ready for more Iranian combatants to be present at the occupied territories of Ukraine? Is Europe ready that the Black Sea will become Russian lake? There has to be understanding of the cost. And in Ukraine, we understand that completely. But if Ukraine is not in the media anymore, it doesn't mean that the threat is not there. It means that it actually requires more of work of each of us and each of you to get society wake up and get politicians to be more proactive. And again, there is a plan of Ukrainian military how to win. We just need to keep lives of our soldiers. And there is money, Russian money, 350 billion. It's been placed here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also on my long list of questions I still have, but I think maybe one or two before we go to the audience, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions there as well. I think last week on the European Summit, finally after 614 days of this war, how long is it? So the EU decided that yes, they're going to look into a plan on how to use the interest of the frozen assets of 350 billion. So how does that make you feel, that after such a long period, there seems finally to be some sort of progress in this field?
It's not enough to win. That's the largest problem. I'm hearing that in Belgium there are just 270 billion frozen assets, but more related to the sanctions. Mm-hmm. And Belgium will be providing in a year 1.7 billion as the interest on the tax, and the tax on the interest from this money for helping Ukraine. But it foresees money for reconstruction, it foresees money for Ukrainian refugees in Belgium. Well, it's not the plan to win. Extending help to Ukraine into 5 years, into 10 years, is not the plan to win. It's the plan to kill more Ukrainians on the battlefield. It's the plan to force more Ukrainians to leave the country. It's the plan to demotivate Ukrainians to return back to Ukraine from Europe. And I understand that Ukrainians here, they are good workers and they are contributing to the economy, but who will be then rebuilding Ukraine? Who will be then fighting?
In Ukraine.
We need our people back, and most of these people want to be back. But I'm a mother of 2 kids. I understand the dilemma of every Ukrainian woman who is abroad with the kids. What are the assurances that my house will not be bombed, or the school will not be bombed? What's the future of my kids if, let's say, I have 17-year-old boy or 16-year-old? Do I want them to mobilize in a year and to fight in the trenches? Or if Ukraine is invited to NATO, I have a plan. Well, my kid will be a soldier of NATO army. It's a different plan. So, again, a good move, not enough to win. There has to be. It's an extraordinary time happening now. What Kremlin is doing is violating all possible international legal agreements. He's challenging the free world and the way how we live. There has to be extraordinary steps from EU as well, and collective West. There has to be extraordinary leadership. Some risks must be taken.
So one of the things that might be happening, at least anyway soon, more or less, is the opening of negotiations with the EU in December. So you were mentioning this homework that Ukraine got last year for opening the accessions, and a lot of attention also is paid on corruption. And you mentioned that actually it's a good thing that Ukraine civil society is longing for these reforms. And you mentioned there's a lot of good examples that you've shown. I was wondering, to your mind, I was going to give you some water, sorry.
Ask the question, I will.
Thanks. In what field do you see that these changes are not going fast enough, to your mind?
We'll implement all anti-corruption and rule of law related requirements on the way towards the next step to negotiations, EU negotiations. Except one, which is the crazy requirement put there by Hungarians intentionally to prevent Ukraine from implementing all these 7 conditionalities. It's about protecting language minority of Hungarians in Zakarpattia. Honestly, if you make all Ukrainians to study Hungarian language from the 1st grade, it will not satisfy Hungarians. Language is not an issue. Language is not a problem in Ukraine. Hungarian language is not a problem in Ukraine, especially now during the large-scale genocidal war and invasion. It's the clear attempt from Orban to please Putin through his influence over the EU, and I think that EU has to do something with that.
I guess he wants money from the EU, yeah? It's might not even be related to Putin. He wants this billions of EU money that he still doesn't get. But I don't know. Thank you so much.
And then he goes to China, meets Putin.
Yeah.
What he wants?
Everything. He wants everything. Thank you so much. I think we have about half an hour now. There is one microphone. Yeah. It's now at the end of the hall. I would like you to ask, if you have a question, raise your hand. It will be quite subjective because I get to be the one to pick the one who gets to ask the question. And I would like to ask you, because I expect many people to want to ask a question, to put it a little bit in a short way, to ask one question at a time and maybe introduce yourself. Yeah, let's start. We can either answer one at a time or collective few. What is there something that
Let's see whether there are questions. I think people are shy.
I'm sure. Yeah, people are shy. Okay, who wants to be the first? Here. Maybe you can come here. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Daria, thank you for amazing work. If all of the Ukrainian lobbyists are like you, then I'm convinced we'll get all the support we need and more. I would love for you to tell us a bit more about the plan with American lobby. What do we do, especially with Republican senators and Republican Party? How do we approach this?
Thank you. Is there somebody who has a related question in this?
We can pick up a few more, not even related. I will.
Okay. There's one at the back. You
mentioned that we need an extraordinary leadership in Europe to come to this sort of coalition. What actors are you putting your hopes up currently? Is that Brussels? Is that London? Is that something else completely?
Can you say it again? Can you rephrase? I'm not sure I got it.
Which actors are you putting your hope on in Europe to take leadership?
Netherlands.
We're having elections shortly, you know. Yeah. One more to kick off. One more question. Okay, we start with these two.
There was.
There was? Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering why the Ukraine doesn't work more with the Russian opposition, like the people from Navalny. They're very against Putin. They are very against the war in Ukraine. But I don't see much support from the Ukrainians for the Russian opposition. I was wondering why.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, thanks. You get the next question in the next round. Yeah.
Okay. What we can do about America? I think, well, first of all, we have to be careful not to interfere into the elections. And it is already where Russia has advantage, because Russia is free to interfere into the elections and is already interfering by contributing to the narratives against Ukraine and narratives which are separating their society. What we see that it is important to go and to work with the constituencies of those states whose representatives are against aid to Ukraine and against support for Ukraine. It's a hard task. But let's say now there is the group of religious leaders from Ukraine at the Capitol Hill. I hope that afterwards they will travel somewhere to Texas or to Florida or whatever else, and have their podiums at the real churches, active churches, evangelical churches, and will explain how Russians are slaughtering evangelical priests in the occupied territories. And it is harder now to convince American audience and politicians, because we lost access to media. media's attention is on Gaza and on Israel. But there are probably different means how to do that. Also, I think your prime minister, whoever will be the next prime minister and the next leader of the Netherlands, has an important role to play. Because if the president of the United States, if Biden, receives a message from, let's say, Rutte or whoever is next, that was the plan in the war. We are kind of afraid that there is no plan. The war is in Europe, and we are a target as well. We are in NATO, but what if Russia actually exhausts Ukraine to the extent that there will be no people to fight, and accidentally attacks Romania or Bulgaria or Narva nuclear power plant in Estonia? What's the plan then of NATO? What's the contingency plan? Are we ready to fight? Or it's cheaper and easier to help Ukraine win now so that Russia is being detained somehow? And that kind of conversations must happen on the level of the first persons. And Ukraine already exhausted its voice in communication with leaders in the White House. So it is important that we have advocates, but not just Lithuanians, Estonians, Latvians, and Poles. It's important that more countries in Western Europe are asking these questions and are sharing their concern. And I'm really thankful to the Netherlands for entering the coalition for providing F-16s to Ukraine, while Americans were not ready to do that. So Danes are and Dutch are now our best friends because you guys believe that you can't win without air support. But this is the American jet, so we need American support anyway on that as well. So this kind of leadership, when Europe is not waiting for America to step in first, when Europe is stepping in first, and European leaders having the honest conversations with President Biden. Let's say Rutte could call Biden and say, Joe, you're probably concerned whether you will win elections or not, and you will be probably being attacked by Trump on expanding NATO. But let's work together on that. It's actually in the interests of us, and there are obligations according to Article 5. So that's, I think, what we could do. Well, the leadership, Netherlands, yeah, obviously, and truly, we are working a lot with Germans. I think there is significant progress there, especially in the German society. But I don't know how to deal with Olaf Scholz and his constant hesitance and his desire to hide behind America. It was Olaf Scholz and President Biden who were against invitation to NATO for Ukraine on the most recent summit in Vilnius. So probably we have to work more with classical Western Europe, France, Spain, and we would need help to get this done. Navalny and Russian opposition, I don't think it's a Putin's war. I think it's the war of Russian people. And there is the deep intoxication of Russian society with colonialism and imperialism. And its sickness has been spread among many Russian opposition leaders, even if they are criticizing Putin.
How do you notice this?
Well, when they are advocating to get this $350 billion not to help Ukraine win, but for their political interests. When they are not admitting that it's actually entire Russian society which is guilty for the genocide happening in Ukraine. When they are getting enormous money from donors in Europe and the US and pouring this money in their YouTube channels where they are asking to help boys who are fighting in Ukraine, Russian boys who are fighting in Ukraine. So this is the kind of double face of Russian opposition. Therefore, we are very skeptical. Obviously, there are good people among Russian opposition, but they are just in absolute minority. But the Navalny team is giving the impression that it's actually there. There is a significant part of Russian population which is liberal. There is a significant part of Russian population which is against war. They just need a moment. We need to negotiate. We need to empower them. We need to create more YouTube clips for them. It will not work in Russia. What will work is actually Ukraine winning. So if I was Russian opposition, I would do everything possible to help Ukraine win, and I would be the first advocate in Texas, in Florida, in America, saying to constituents and to politicians there, for the sake of Russia and for the sake of our people, help Ukraine win. For the sake of our people and our future, confiscate this 350 billion. And when I'm hearing that Khodorkovsky and Yukos are trying to get this money, I'm kind of, oh, yeah? Okay, good Russians. Therefore, we don't think that there is any chance for all these Navalny people and so-called Russian liberals to get into the power soon in Russia. There will be no shift of power. There are different elites in Kremlin. Putin is not the only one who is making up the decisions. There are still a lot of crooks who are more motivated with war and a lot of crooks who are more motivated with economy. But both are crooks. No chances for liberal opposition to come into power. They will be absolute minority, but what the damage they are doing on the Western societies, they are creating the image that there is hope for Russia. And it is very detrimental for us.
Thank you. So, is there other people who would like to pose a question? Yeah, here. Oh, yeah, and you start here, please.
Yes, my name is Harry Hummel. I campaign. I'm, active in human rights campaigning in different ways with respect to Ukraine and Eastern Europe in general. I have a couple of questions. One is on the 350 billion. The only avenue that I see at the moment to, start a discussion about this amount of money and how it could be used for Ukraine is through the Register of Damages that has been created by the Council of Europe. This is only registration at the moment, but there is kind of a promise also based on UN resolution, General Assembly resolution, that this should lead to a program of reparations. Now, this is longer term, and it is also something else than what you are talking about, for the purpose of the money. You want to use it for strengthening Ukrainian defense and for fighting Russia. What is your opinion about this Register of Damages, and how, do you think that human rights campaigners in Western Europe or in the West in general should focus more on what you are asking, as the purpose for this sum of money? I think it is more or less a realistic...
One sec, because I asked to put the question shortly, and you mentioned you have more.
So this was question
only
one.
The first, yeah?
Question two. I will limit it to
only
two questions.
Okay.
One, this is not a human rights question, but it's a question about the position of Ukraine and the longer term perspective that you have. You were talking about winning the war quickly and trying to convince the collective West to support Ukraine more. I think that there possibly should be a plan B, which would be a plan under which Ukraine is much more on its own. And, do you see a possibility for Ukraine to start producing its own weapons in a much more massive way than you have been doing until now? Is this an issue for discussion in Ukraine? And could you see a future for Ukraine as becoming the main producer of arms, not only in Europe, but around the world?
You keep on adding questions. Okay, thank you very much.
But these are good questions.
It's a good questions
to respond.
And yeah, these are already a lot, but we add one more person. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my question is, you say there's no plan in the West to win this war quickly. The West doesn't understand that it is their war and not Ukrainian, the war of Ukraine. I think that's the point, that politicians and people here don't feel it's their war. It's the war of Ukraine. And when Russia says we are fighting NATO, and you say it's not about Ukraine but about NATO, nobody here believes that's the fact. They believe Russia has shown its weakness in its war in Ukraine, and so it won't even try to fight NATO.
So what's the question?
Yeah, what's the question? Yeah.
Please, your comment. How to deal with this argument?
On 350 billion, honestly, well, register of damages we can try, but it will take a long time, and again, it will not help Ukraine win. Reparations, well, it's just returning people what they've lost. It's not preventing people from losing more lives and more goods. It's just illogical. And as a lawyer, I understand the complexities of confiscating assets which belong to the companies, which belong to natural persons. It will take time. Confiscating of Russian assets, we understand that. It can take decades. But confiscating assets which belong to the state is a political decision. It's about the readiness to lift sovereign immunity from Russia. And there is, it's a legal solution. It's about just this readiness. And yeah, we are hearing different arguments. What if there will be retaliation? What if other countries will start confiscating our assets? But the point is, okay, why do you think if you confiscate Russian assets, China will be confiscating yours? Where is logic here? And I think that the true reason why there is no will to confiscate that in Europe is because Europe got used to hide behind the United States. Let's be honest. In bold decisions, in security decisions, and in some decisions like confiscate 350 billion of Russian assets. Nord Stream 2, you know, everyone relied on America. But now it's not time to wait for Americans. There is no will there to confiscate this money. Well, they are also discussing already 650 days of war, and they are discussing how hard it is to confiscate this money. They lack political will to get it done. Their key enemy is China, not Russia. They want to focus on presidential campaign or whatever. This war is far away. It's hard to explain to their citizens that there is a need still to do something for Ukraine. But this war is in Europe. Ukraine is the largest European country. It has the war in Ukraine has direct impact on what is happening in your countries. So some sort of leadership on lifting Russian immunity would just speed that up. It's just a hypocrisy to sit on Russian money in Europe and not being able to give it to Ukraine in order to win. Plan B, production of weapons, obviously it's now our key priority of the new Minister of Defense, of Ministry of Strategic Production, is the priority of President, and a lot of is going on among the startuppers in Ukraine, among just average IT engineers, software developers, just engineers. We are building drones in garages. We are building designs for ammunition in different venues near the front line. We just need scale it up. And there were very innovative solutions which were designed in Ukraine, which works in terms of drones. FPV drones are working well in Ukraine. We just need more of them because Russia is vertically doing that. They just mobilized IT engineers, IT people and engineers, and said, "Okay, guys, these are resources you have. This is the time you have. If you are not building these drones in a month, you go to Bakhmut." Or in Avdiivka, or wherever, and for the first, and it's a kind of motivation. We can't do the same, but our engineers, they are doing this. They are saying, "Wow, we built a drone; it works. We need more spare parts. We need more contracts from the government. The government doesn't have money. Finding the spare parts on the central level." Means that somebody has to replace spare parts from China, because still a lot of spare parts are from China, and talk to Koreans, to Taiwanese, to provide some spare parts like that. Also, I believe that there is big future in localization of the defense production in Ukraine. Big defense companies should, and I believe are interested, because in Ukraine they can understand what works with their weapons, what doesn't work, what is the real combat testing mechanisms. Like, the very important finding in this war is that expensive, precise munitions are not always effective. The price of the munitions is important. And the cheap FPV drone can create more damage than Excalibur missile to a certain extent, because Excalibur missile, which costs a lot, but it is ineffective under Russian radio electronic warfare. Russians are great. We shouldn't underestimate them in electronic warfare. They are also advancing. They are learning a lot. And with Russians, North Koreans are learning a lot. With Russians, Iranians are learning a lot. With Russians, all the evil from the world, Venezuela, Gaza, Hamas people, learning a lot. And Wagner is still this private army functions across the world. They are learning a lot. But our allies, Europeans, Americans, they voluntarily decided not to learn. So we are not coming to Ukraine, not even to risk to be present there, and what if Russia will think that we are fighting with Ukrainians? No one cares that Russia already, for the second year in a row, is saying that they are fighting NATO combatants in Ukraine. So even if they are not present, NATO combatants, Russians will keep saying that they are fighting NATO. But the lack of presence of people with expertise in defense production in Ukraine means that the collective West is depriving itself from ability to learn what defense solutions actually work in the modern combat. Terrorists are learning. We have to learn as well. What was the last one on NATO? That societies here that they don't understand.
Yeah, that it's the European war. But I think you already mentioned quite a lot about this.
I don't know what to say. I think probably people have to travel more to Ukraine.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people are traveling now. Well, I do know that not a lot of people are traveling. You travel? Too. Yeah, but it's a job. Yeah. So I have a lot of volunteers from different countries who are just traveling to Ukraine on their own. They are making charities, and they come to Ukraine, bring some, I don't know, a drone or whatever to the units. And then they understand what is going on the ground. They return back to their communities. They explain it. They become their ambassadors. So if government is not doing enough, so then citizens have to take responsibility. I think that should work. Thank you. Are there more questions here? Yeah, no. Good. Let's start here. Thank you. People are getting in the mood. Yeah?
Yeah,
good.
Slowly.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's working. We've got a question to Kisha. If I remember, you work for Dutch broadcast, NMS. What can we read about this lecture tomorrow morning on the NMS website?
Oh, well, that's an easy question. I will answer straight away because it's not me you put the questions to, but this one I will answer because my colleague Raam interviewed you yesterday. So tomorrow there will be an interview with Daria on the website and on the radio. Thank you. So, other questions, please, to Daria. Yeah.
You refer to the citizens, what Dutch citizens can do. I think there are a lot of specialists in Russia and Ukraine at present in this room. I think you're right when you frame the issue as not a war against Ukraine, but as Russia has declared war on the West. And that's the problem. We don't realize in Holland that it is a war of Russia against our Western way of living. What can we do as specialists to get away with this frame that it's about Ukraine and that it's not only about Ukraine, but it's especially about our way of living?
Thank you. I saw a lot of hands here. Maybe two more.
You said you think Ukraine will win. Well, I hope so too. What kind of society Ukraine will be once it has won the war? Because there's, as what I expect, a lot of jealousy. People will take revenge. For example, well, I work with some Ukrainian refugees. Some are making good money here. When they go back to Ukraine, and then other people in Ukraine, they worked as a volunteer, didn't earn anything, so there will be, well, problems.
One more? It's up to you.
Yeah.
Next one's yours, yeah.
All right. Daria, good evening. Thank you for being here. For the audience, my name is Karel Burger-Dierven. I'm the first honorary consul of Ukraine here in the Netherlands. So it's great to be here, and I can only sympathize and support you in your fight for victory of Ukraine. My question is also actually related to what you came for here today, the Anti-Corruption Action Center. And what I'm very curious about is how did your work and the work of your people changed in the last 1 year and a half with the start of the war? And of course, please also the great successes you made, because it's very important work you do. Thank you.
Let's start answering?
Yeah, let's start. Yeah.
3 in the row. So what experts on Russia can do in Holland? Well, I think spread the word, educate. I think, I don't know how history is being taught in history, in history lessons at Dutch schools. But you know, I would review what's being taught about the Ukrainian history there and about Russian history. It's the first thing from what I've started. We have to deoccupy history and explain just to the pupils, to students, that Ukraine has strong connections to Europe, that Ukraine is actually Europe, and it's not Russia, which is inherited Kyiv Rus heritage. Also debates, all the media debates, all the public debates. I think that experts on Russia are important players there, and narratives. So publications in various books, various journals, specific journals. This is not less important fight, the fight for the proper narratives and for the truth, than the fight at the battlefields. And we understand that Russians, we were talking about ballerines and ballet. Russians are investing and were investing a lot of money into spreading their narratives through kind of spreading the Russian culture through ballet, ballet, or spreading some Russian writers. So there is positive sentiment to Russian culture, which was created. And there are a lot of Russian scholars who actually present Russia through the scales of Russians. let's say in the Harvard University, let's say, people usually were studying either in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, the history and Slavic languages, but Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian language was under the radar. It's the Timothy Snyder who's reopening this new world. I think we need people like Timothy Snyder in every European university to open up Ukraine, its culture and history, and its struggle for independence to Europe. What society Ukraine will be after the victory? It's a very good question, and it's a very complicated question. Simply, Ukraine will be different than it was before February 24. There will be a lot of demobilized people, a lot of veterans. We will have a lot of beautiful people without legs and hands on prostheses. We'll have to make our society for them just, so that we have to return them and create jobs for them and respect those who sacrifice their health for Ukrainian victory. Obviously, there will be a lot of discussions what to do with people from the occupied territories, because the longer people are there, the more questions whether they collaborated with Russians or not, how they will vote, should we provide them immediately right to vote, how we can reconcile them, should they undergo some, a lot of questions. As for the people who left Ukraine, honestly, I like the approach of the Poland. When you come to Poland, you receive 300 zloty, which is, I don't know, it's a small amount of money. And if you have kids, every month you receive 500 zloty, which is also small money. You can survive with this money. You must work to survive in Poland. I think that Ukrainian refugees, if they left the country with just few exemptions of those who are not able to work because of the health conditions or some family conditions, they shouldn't receive money just to stay here and not work. I think that all money for refugees, absolute majority of this money, should be redirected to Ukraine, to those people who are staying in Ukraine, to those people who are coming from occupied territories. Internally, there is a lot of internal migration in Ukraine because they bear more risks, and they are staying in order to contribute to the society. Those who didn't leave are merely elderly people, and a lot of people are mobilized. So those who still work and didn't leave, they have additional burden for the elderly people. That has to be kept in mind. And honestly, I don't care if somebody will not come because they earn a lot of money here. I really know that a lot of people won't come. But I understand that it's harder to come the longer you're staying in another country. For example, if you have kids here, they undergo the program in Netherlands. They learn in Dutch, right? It's hard to learn simultaneously Dutch school program and Ukrainian school program. So in order for us to be able to return kids to Ukraine, it is important that Ukrainian kids here have access and ability to study Ukrainian curriculum. But how to get it done if in parallel you have to start Dutch curriculum? These are a lot of questions unresolved. I think that also Ukraine will be open to people from other countries to come after the victory, both from Western Europe, from America, but also from Asia. I think there will be some sort of migration happening.
Is this already being discussed in Ukraine, these kind of questions?
We are very much, in some circles it's been discussed, but we are very much focused on how to survive winter and how to prevent the amount of killed in action soldiers. But it's important that some people are starting asking these questions.
Mm-hmm.
The last question was how we changed.
How your work changed.
How our work changed. For the last 10 years, I'm focusing on fighting corruption and rule of law, and we have a team of 25 people in Ukraine doing that. But we had a contingency plan. We treated the invasion very seriously. Some people told us from America and also from Ukraine that we are likely in the kill list of Russians. If you recall, in early February there was in media this information that Russians have the list of people they will be first to kill when they take over Kyiv. And we understood that we are likely in that list. So we alerted our people, but we had a plan that once war starts, part of our team who understands how international relations work will relocate abroad to mobilize proper response of international audience. Part of our team decided to mobilize. We still have 5 people who are in active service, including our head of the board, Vitaly Shabunin. But still, main part of our team is doing anti-corruption and rule of law. We're going to anti-corruption court to observe how the trials against oligarch Kolomoisky is happening and about other important personalities. We are drafting legislation. We are doing investigation. We are now observing very in details and participating in the process of selection of new prosecutors to anti-corruption prosecutor's office. So we are doing this routine job which we used to do before the large-scale invasion. Just in addition to fighting corruption, we need to mobilize world for Ukrainian victory and to learn new words about weapons and about war. We also had to focus a lot on needed reforms in the defense and security sector. Because we believe that for the NATO interoperability and for ability to do localization of production of weapons in Ukraine, it is crucially to clean up the sector and make it more just and more accountable and more transparent. I think I answered.
Thank you. Yeah, you answered all the questions. I just noticed that it's already past our ending time, so I'm really sorry for the bad. One last question? Yeah, you see, but you've had your chance. You didn't start in the beginning asking questions, and now everybody wants to ask questions. We have time for one last question, and I think you will be in the bar maybe for some time if people really have pressing questions. Okay. So it's a heavy responsibility, yeah, to have the last. So I hope it's a really good one.
My name is Dan May. I'm a child of the Cold War, and I'm an ex-military man. Wars get lost or won because of yes or no having clear objectives. I hear you talking a lot about money, and reparation. It would seem to me that for you, the most important objective would be to kick the Russians out and become a member of NATO. Forget about the money. What does your government say about this? Thank you.
He knows better, yeah?
Well, we need to talk about money because we need to have to pay weapons for money. Defense companies are not producing weapons for free for some reason. I don't know why. And they are expensive. And some of the companies started selling shells per one price, and when the demand increased, the price increased for some reason. Mm-hmm. So our government is clear. We ask confiscate Russian money in order to help ramp up production. We ask help Ukraine to do localization. Well, you know, I'm not saying that we have to be in NATO tomorrow, but let's put it another question. There was so much effort already put in Ukraine to strengthen our army. A lot of weapons was delivered to Ukraine, and we have this experience how to use these weapons. We know what works, what doesn't work. We will now speed up production of Ukrainian weapons, and at the end of the victory, we will have the most strong army in Europe. the question is, do we want this army to be part of NATO or not?
Thank you so much. I think that's a good way to end tonight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, it was really, really inspiring. Okay. Take the applause, yeah?
Okay. Should we take it off?
Oh, I think you should enjoy. Everybody's happy to.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your inspiring lecture. Keep up the good work, and thank you, audience, for being kind, having interesting questions, and see you in the bar.
And for having interest in Ukraine and coming in the evening on Monday. So I really appreciate all your help and interest. Thank you.